Hey guys, my name is Albert, and welcome to our first sprint review. So today I'll be talking about the different user stories that we were able to accomplish during our first sprint, and also be talking about our progress in terms of whether or not we met our acceptance criteria, and I'll also be talking about our overall project progress as well as whether or not we achieved our sprint goal. So let's get started. So our first user story for the first sprint was to set up the Salesforce website, and essentially that means that we were going to create a collective Salesforce account with a shared username and password with times where each team member could access the Salesforce platform. Essentially, we decided that we were going to use my account, and I decided to change my password so that it was accessible to all members of the team. So we decided to use Google Calendar to figure out times where each person could log in and log out, because if there's too many people logged on, then ultimately there'll be errors in the development of the system. So we used Calendar to split up time, and I also sent everyone our login credentials, username and password for this. So that satisfies our first user story. So our next user story was to create a database schema, and essentially within that user story, we're supposed to create each entity and also create our relationships between our main classes. So when creating our database schema, we had to set up the data in accordance to each class, as well as their attributes within Salesforce. So right here is our database schema. I know you can see that it's not in Lightning Experience. That's because when using Incognito, for some reason, they want us to use Classic, but just know that we can always switch back to Lightning Experience when using a regular tab. But right here is our schema builder. We have a requester, request, and data steward, our main classes, and then we also have subclasses: access request, revoke request, access, active access request, and on hold access request. So as you can see within our main classes, we do have our records as well. So we have requester department, requester email, requester first name. Also have the same for request, data steward, as well as all the other classes. And we do have our relationship set up for our main classes. We're just going to await confirmation from our product owner to make sure that we're going to incorporate the right relationships with access requests and revoke requests to user, and the same as for these classes as well. And yeah, that satisfies our second user story. Our acceptance criteria was that we had each class set up. We also incorporate another part of our acceptance criteria was that we incorporated each record as well. So that satisfies all of our acceptance criteria for our use story, create database schema on Salesforce. And on to the next one. Yeah, so our next user story for our first sprint was to manage the data steward account. And essentially what was involved with this was to add all the existing data stewards, as well as creating instructions for managing those data stewards. So as you can see, I navigated to our data stewards tab, and we do have two data stewards added. These are, just keep in mind that these are dummy data, but essentially some of the acceptance criteria for managing data steward is first that we must be able to create a new data steward account. So to do that, we hit new, and we have all of our information needed to enter a new data steward account. And we must also be able to update an existing data steward account. So looking at these two existing accounts, we have Walter Wright and Rachel P. So if I wanted to manage and update or modify Rachel P's account, I would just simply click and modify. So also, the data steward table should also be populated with the correct attributes. So as you can see, all of these are the correct attributes. We have the data steward name, first and last. We have their email, steward phone, steward ID, UGID, and so forth. And those are the acceptance criteria for managing managing a data steward account. And in addition, one more acceptance criteria was to make the instructions. So right here, as you can see, we do have the instructions created with respective screenshots and instructions. So those are all for the data steward instructions. And that does it for that user story. So the next user story for the sprint was to manage our requester. And what goes with that user story is that we have to be able to add all the existing requesters as well as creating instructions for managing requesters. So as you can see, I'm navigating to our requesters tab, and we do have existing requester names. And again, these are just dummy data, and some of the acceptance criteria for managing a requester is first that we must be able to create a new user account. So like the data stewards, we hit new and we populate this, this information right here. We must also be able to update a request. So to do that, we must be able to update a user account. So to do that, here we have a existing requester name. So if I wanted to update Mike Undi, I'd simply just click on this and update. Don't want to update that right now, but next we also have to be able to populate with all the formal attributes. So again, to demonstrate that we have all the attributes here, we have name, first name, last name, email, phone number, and etc. And the last acceptance criteria that we had met was to make the instructions. So here you can see that we have our managed request instructions. So first we would select request, enter in the fields, and etc. And for this user story, all of the acceptance criteria have been met. Now moving on to the next user story. So our second to last user story was to manage the requester. And for this, we had to add all the existing requesters as well as create instructions for managing requesters. And as you can see, I'm hovering over and selecting the request tab, and we do have some existing requests. So some of the acceptance criteria for managing requests is that first we must be able to create or submit a new request. So again, we say new, and we'd enter in all this information right here. And we must also be able to update a request. So looking at the existing request, I could click this right here and update, just as we did before. And in addition, the request table should also be populated with the attributes that are appropriate for a request. So as you can see, when trying to make a new one, we have the request ID, and we also has a date and time as well as a request comment. And in addition, we must also be able to filter out and search by requester. So to do that, we could just use this function right here to search the list, as well as using this filter function right here as well. And that does it for our second to last user story. Oh, sorry, my apologies. I did forget to mention that we do have completed the instructions as well. So as you can see, manage requester, not that. We do have manage request right here. And it explains in detail of how to create and manage a requester account, a request. And that does it for our second to last user story. Our acceptance criteria have been met. And so our final user story that we had for our first sprint was to implement a tooltip function. And essentially what that is that when someone, like a requester, is filling out a request, they're able to have a better idea of what they're supposed to fill out or populate. So for example, we have requester first name, and it gives us more information on how to enter that. Just as email, enter email, enter last name, as well as what department, and that satisfies that user story. And so finally, to assess our project progress, our team was able to complete each user story for the first sprint, and all acceptance criteria were met for this phase. In addition, we do plan on updating the system once we get more information about our domain class diagram. And to summarize, our group is on track for the next sprint. Our goal for our first sprint was to set a good foundation for the future sprints by incorporating the right domain class diagram and all fields and tabs that were necessary for the users. This should set a good foundation for when we move on to our more technical intensive sprints dealing with UI and other functionalities, but overall I'd say we're ready to tackle Sprint 2. So thank you for listening, and looking forward to the next sprint.